Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone again for joining the CaFÉ webinar. My name is Justine Chappell and I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager for CaFÉ. Today I'm going to show a deep dive into how to select the artists for your jury process. I'll give a general overview of setting up your jury, but mainly I want to spend some extra time today talking about the sorting process and how to use the jurors' scores to move artists to the not invited and invited statuses. So I'm hopeful this will be a good review for many of you, but also provide some useful explanations for some of the more trickier parts. The key items that we'll cover today include tips for setting up the jury and juror accounts, sorting applications based on their scores, and finalizing the jury results and notifying artists. Let me go ahead and just set the scene a little bit for what we'll be talking about today, kind of introduce this demo call that we'll be using. This is exactly what you see on your end, and we've got our demo call. You'll see in our application statuses here, we've got 50 artists or 50 artworks, I should say, entries in the received status. So in this case, our application window just closed. We received 50 artworks and we're ready to begin our jury process. Before we get to that, though, I do want to kind of mention a couple things about the statuses here. When you begin your jury, you'll need to make sure that all of the applications you are going to score are in the received status. I know some folks like to review the applications, and in doing so, they might move those applications to the reviewed status. And I can kind of demonstrate here. If you don't know this process, this could be kind of useful. If you click on received, and let's say we'll just take the first application here, maybe you are reviewing the applications individually to check to make sure the artist is eligible, check to make sure that the artwork fits, that it can actually be juried by the jurors and they don't have to worry about anything, whether it qualifies for the opportunity. So as you're reviewing it, maybe in this action section here, you'll set your status to reviewed, and then you can go down and click to the next application, review that one again. If that one looks good, you can go to reviewed. If it doesn't look good, maybe you move it to withdrawn or declined, and notify the artist. But let's say you have that process where you're moving folks to reviewed, and all of that is great. That's a good process to do. I'm going to go back to our table here. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set the scene as if all of our applications are in the reviewed status. I'm just kind of showing you here what happens when you do this. So let's say now that the application window is closed and we reviewed all of the applications, they're all in that reviewed status. However, when you go to start your jury process, so let's head into jury administration. If I were to click view applications here to see which applications are in our jury, you'll see that no applications are found. So this is to show that if your applications are in reviewed, you'll need to move them to received in order to start the jury, because the jurors can only see applications in the received status. So let's head back to events management, and to fix this, it's pretty simple. You can do it all at once by clicking that reviewed status, and then making sure, I would like to just set it to viewing all on the same page, so you can do this in one fell swoop. Let's scroll to the bottom of our table here, click change all applications to, and click that received status, click change status, and there you go, they're all in received now. So when I head to jury administration and I click view applications, I now get that table of those 50. So that's just the first, thing I want to iterate, is to ensure that all of your applications are in the received status before you start the jury process. All right, well, let's get into it. So the first step is setting up the settings for our jurors and opening the jury, essentially. So we'll start in this setup section of our jury administration page, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of some of these items. I'm not going to talk too much in depth about certain settings or options, but I can always take questions at the end of the webinar about them, and we have our entire jury administration help guide, which goes into depth on what these settings mean in the Help Center. So the first setting you'll encounter is the jury status. So it will be set to not yet started before your process starts. But when you're ready, you'll go ahead and change that to in progress. Doing this also kind of pulls down a curtain for artists so that they can no longer see the status on their end. Maybe they've seen their application as received while the application window is open, but once you change it to in progress, that essentially puts up that curtain and they can't see their status. It just says jury in progress. So make sure that's set to in progress. This will also make sure that the jurors have access to the entries. The next one is scoring rate. So you'll choose 1 through 7, 1 through 20, or yes, no, maybe. We'll get into, what this scoring rate determines later on in the process, but you'll choose the one that works for you and your purpose. You might also choose a different scoring rate for different rounds. So maybe you have your jurors start out with yes, no, maybe to kind of do an initial screening. And then once you sort those entries and move the yeses or maybes to round two, maybe you want the juror to scrutinize them a little bit more and score them 1 through 7 or 1 through 20. Or you might want to do the complete opposite of what I said and start with 1 through 7, 1 through 20 or something, and then move to yes, no, maybe. So you can decide what works for you. Maybe you stick with the same one. And maybe you have your own criteria that you give jurors in which they have to, create a score for different categories and then calculate them out of 20 or something like that. You can totally do that. These are just the options that CaFÉ gives you so that you can enter a score that will then be used in that sorting process. The scorecard style, you'll go ahead and choose which option you want jurors to have. This essentially changes how the scorecard looks to the juror. And I'm not going to get too much into it. Slideshow view essentially shows one application at a time in a slideshow. List view shows 20 applications per page in a list, and they can scroll as they score. Grid view is only available to calls for entry that are scoring by art and not by application. So scoring by art means a juror is giving a score to every single image that is being juried, and in which case the grid view is available so that they can have a more at-a-glance view, more quick scoring method of viewing all those artwork and scoring them. Grid view is not available for calls for entry that are scoring by application, in which case images are grouped together into a body of work or portfolio that's being scored as a whole. So in that case, grid view wouldn't make sense. So you'll choose which one the jurors will use, and if you want to change it midway, if a juror says they prefer a different view, you can change that for them. Just know that if you have multiple jurors, they will all get the same view. The scorecard sort, it will determine the order that the applications are presented to the jurors, whether that's application ID, artist last name, or random. Application ID is more or less the order in which the applications are received or essentially started by the artist, since an ID number is given as soon as the artist starts that application. So that's kind of more or less in the order that it's received. Artist last name, self-explanatory, and then random. If I were to choose the random option, I then need to click randomize order, and that would actually perform the shuffle for those applications on the juror side. The blind jury, you will select whether you want it active or inactive. If you have it active, that means the artist's name will not be shown on the scorecard to the juror. Just know that this does not necessarily mean it will hide the name if the artist typed their name into the artist statement or anywhere else in the application, but it will make sure that the name itself on that scorecard is hidden. For the jury round, this is self-explanatory as well. You'll start in round 1, and if you sort applications and then narrow it down for round 2, you can change it to round 2. And once you've done that, it'll give you an option for round 3 and 4 and so on. So once you have those set, you can also then move forward to looking at any scorecard display or questions you want to hide from the jurors. So anything I select from these lists here will hide it and will not be visible to the jurors. This might be useful if, let's say, the artwork price is irrelevant and you don't want that to become a factor for the juror. You can hide that. let's say in application questions, I ask some things about the artists that don't necessarily pertain to the artwork itself or the application. It really is just for reference for the organization, or maybe in this case, there's a member of the reception and you want to ask that, but you don't need jurors to know about that. Maybe you have some marketing questions here that you ask them, and the jurors don't need to know about that either. So you can hide anything that you don't want the jurors to see. Once you have all those settings, make sure to click Save, and that will make sure that the jury status is truly in progress, that all the settings that you've got are updated. So that's a little bit about the setup there. It's pretty simple. If you work with jurors that have specific preferences, you can, change that. But that's all you really have to do. Again, before you start your jury, you just need to make sure that the artwork is in received and the jury status is in progress. All right. Next, I'm going to talk about how to add jurors and assign them to the call. So in our jury administration page here, you'll see the jurors section. It just appeared here because I'd removed that list of applications, but if you do have the table pulled up, you'll see that the jurors are just at the bottom. But let me hide that again. So the jurors that are listed here are the ones that are, an active juror account that's assigned to score your call. And when you first get in here, obviously we already have some jurors assigned, but you'll see no jurors assigned when you first start. And so you want to click Add Juror. And so if you have any folks that have never scored on CaFÉ before, you'll want to create this juror account for them. If they've scored for a different organization, that doesn't matter. They will need to have a specific juror account for your organization. So when you get to this form, you'll just fill it out. You'll create a username for them and you'll create a password for them. However, we do recommend that jurors reset their own password just to make things a little bit more secure, but you'll at least give them a temporary password. And then of course you'll fill in their information. Email is pretty important so that they can log in and reset their password and all that. So you can add a new account this way. Once you click Save, it'll simply get added to your jurors list here and get assigned to the call. But let's say you have a juror that did jury for you in the past, that did score entries for a different call. Maybe it's an annual call and you have them come back every year and they already have an account. But if they're not listed here, that just means they need to be assigned to the call. So I'm going to go to the jury section and click on my jurors tab. This is going to take me to the list of jurors that I have for this account for your organization. So let's say they were a previous juror and you want to reactivate them, or not necessarily reactivate, but assign them to the call. You'll just find them in this list here and click View Juror. And then you'll see the list of calls that are available for them to jury. And in this case, I want this artwork exhibition demo call. I'll click the checkbox next to that, and I will click Save. And you'll see our Cameron Green here. Once I come back to the administration page, they'll be listed on the jurors tab. If I did the wrong juror or I want to remove that, I can just click on his name, deselect that call, click Save, and he'll get removed. You can also reactivate an inactive juror if you are the account manager for your organization, meaning you have access to the account users in the profile section. You can go to account users, go to jurors, and show deactivated users. In this case, you'll get a list of deactivated jurors that maybe had juried way in the past, but they didn't need their account anymore. They got deactivated. You can then go in and reactivate their account by changing it to active, assigning them to the call and saving that. And that would get them re-added to that call as well. So that's the scenario for, jurors and adding them. I do recommend, if they do have an existing juror account, that you simply reassign them to the call. That way you're not creating a separate username and having two different accounts or more than two accounts, and the juror gets confused on, which username to use. So just allow them to use the same username and password by reassigning them to the new call. And that's how you add your jurors. So that's about it for setting up the jury. Once you have done all the steps to, set your jury status to in progress, put the application in the receive status, set up your juror account so that they're all added here. Maybe you've sent them information on how to log in and they've all been able to log in. You're ready to go. In which case you would just tell your jurors to go ahead and score. We do have a juror help guide in the Help Center, which is really helpful. It walks them through the steps of, depending on which scorecard style they have, how to view and score the entries. A common issue we do see, in case you are wondering, is jurors might log in and they are able to log in, but then they don't see a specific call, they don't see any entries to be able to score, and that could be due to a couple different things. One is that jury status, making sure that they're in progress. And then the other is the jurors not being assigned to the actual call. If that's the case, then you'll have to go to that jurors list and make sure that they're assigned to the call. So those are the two common things, is the jury status and the assigning the juror to the call. The other problem is possibly the applications not being in the right status. They have to be in received. So as the jurors are scoring, you can click View Scored Applications to view the progress. You'll see the table here, and each juror will be listed next to their score. If they have provided any comments, which I don't know if we have any comments here. Let's see in round 2 if there is anything. Doesn't look like there's any comments on this one. It'll just appear right next to the score. So we'll just put it in quotations, whatever the comment is for that artwork. And that way you can kind of view anything that the juror might want to tell you about that artwork. Maybe they're just making notes for themselves to review later. Or maybe they're making a comment if you really want them to provide feedback for artists that you then go ahead and share with them. They can leave comments on the scorecard. If you are viewing it in this table, you can click to sort. Let's say we want to sort the table by average score. So I'll click it once to sort it ascending from lowest to highest, or I can click it again to sort descending, highest to lowest. And this will kind of, if you're curious, you can come in here and see which pieces are being scored the highest and just kind of keep track that way. You'll also see in the jurors list that the total will get announced for, will be marked here for how many they scored in whichever round you're in. Looks like we're still in round 2. I can go back to round 1 here and show that they've, scored certain amounts in round 1. Once they've reached that total amount and it shows up on here, they're good to go. Just know that CaFÉ on this side will update pretty much in real time, so long as the jurors are saving the scores on their end. So some scorecard styles, the list view or slideshow view, will be a little bit different in when all the scores are saved, so either individually or in batches. Just make sure that they do click save as much as possible so that they're not losing any scores. If they happen to score a batch of 20 applications and then walk away from the window and it closes down or it times out, they won't have those scores saved. So on their end, it's big green buttons that say save scores and continue, and they'll just need to click that as much as possible, and you'll see it on your end update in real time when they've saved those scores. You also see here we had a little trash can icon next to the scores for the jurors. You can click that if you want. That will remove the scores for that juror. It will then give you a little bit of a grace period. If I remove that and I did not on accident, I can restore the scores. Click that icon again. However, after a certain time, if I have deleted them, it will get saved permanently. So just be careful with that one. But this can be useful. Maybe you as an administrator wants to create your own juror account and you log in. You can test it out, score entries, and play around with it a little bit. But then when you come back and you want the real jury to begin, you can delete your scores so that they're not affected. And if you see any weird things in your table here, maybe a certain juror hadn't scored a certain piece, that's probably because they didn't save it, so you can work with them to ensure that they're saving their scores. So the next step, once the jurors have scored all the applications and they've told you that they're done, you can move forward to sort them into the not invited and invited statuses. The first thing you'll want to do is just review, make sure everyone has scored all the entries, and then we can go ahead and click the Manage tab. The first thing we're going to do in this section is change status to not invited. So essentially we're going to take the lower scored applications and move them to the not invited status. So go ahead and click this. Don't worry about clicking it and anything happening automatically. You'll know when something something happens. I don't want you all to be too afraid of this section. It's really not too bad. The first thing we'll want to do when we get to this page is we want to look at our categories. Which categories are we going to sort first? Is it going to be all of them? We just want to do this all at once? Or do we want to go individually and just look at the 2D category, 3D category? Just to clarify, the categories are whatever you set up in your application. For this demo call, we created 2 categories, 2D and 3D, just to kind of demonstrate the differences in categories. But you might have several categories, you might not have any categories, in which case you'll just want to make sure you select this checkbox here at the top. Even though you'll just be looking at the total number, the default is to not select anything. And so you'll see here when I deselect the categories, our total are all 0, and that's because it's not taking anything into account. When I select our categories, it's taking all of those applications to account, and it's actually updating those. So just make sure those checkboxes are checked. You'll see in this table here, we've got the number of scored applications. We've got the average score amongst all of the jurors. So this is saying out of all of the jurors for all of these applications in this category, the average score is 4.28. We've got our minimum cutoff score. We're going to talk about that in depth today, so we'll get back to that. We've got our to be not invited, so depending on the minimum cutoff score, it's going to do the math for you and telling you how many are going to be moved to not invited, and then how many are remaining, and then the percentage of those that are going to be not invited. So let's talk about this minimum cutoff score. This is essentially the cutoff score that will determine which applications are going to be in the not invited status and which applications will remain in the jury. To kind of explain this definition a little bit, I wrote it out for you so you can view it visually, but the minimum cutoff score is the score in which any entries with a score below the minimum cutoff will be moved to not invited. Again, any entries with a score below the minimum cutoff score will be moved to not invited. So for example, if our minimum cutoff score is 4, any entries scored below 4 will be moved to not invited. Note that I didn't say 4 and below, I just said below 4. That will come into play a little bit later. So the minimum cutoff score is something that you will determine in order to sort those entries and essentially eliminate from the jury the entries that you don't want to move forward with. But when I say eliminate, I'm saying it very loosely. I'm simply changing that their status to not invited. So let's go back here. So the minimum cutoff score, you can determine, and there's a few different ways to determine what cutoff score you want. And I'm going to go through the ones that we know best and the ones that are most common, and maybe you'll find a situation that is a little bit better for you than what you're currently using. So the first option for the minimum cutoff score is keeping it at the average. So you'll see right now that the default minimum cutoff score is the average score. So it's just going to set it to the average. And that's great if you have a lot of applications and you just need to make a big chop and narrow down those entries, and you're just going to use the average score as that criteria for what makes the cut and what doesn't. So you can just leave it at the average. And that's great. You'll see here when I click show applications, it's going to pull up the table of which applications don't make that cutoff. And if you see the average score here per application, it's just going to show you, the score that it got. And you can see that these scores are all below 4.28. And if that's all you want, that's great. You can go ahead and click change status. Once I click change status, that's the point in which all these applications, all these 24 applications, will be moved to the not invited status. But maybe you don't want to use the average, that's fine. Another thing you can do is simply pick your own score for what you determine is that cutoff for the entries. So maybe you know in your mind that you just want anyone that scored 4 or higher to move on. And 4 is just a good number to you, and you think that that's a good way. In this case, I should remind everyone, we're using a 1 through 7 scoring rate. So you think 4 is a good number so that anyone that scored 4 or above can move forward, in which case our minimum cutoff score, you're going to change it to 4. And you'll see our numbers update in real time here. So again, minimum cutoff score is 4. Anything below 4 is going to move to not invited. Our table also updated here, so you can see that. We've got no 4s in here, no 4s and aboves, and that's all good. So again, you can pick your cutoff score. Maybe you have high standards and you want to move it to 5, but you'll see here how much are being removed. That's quite a big chop in our case here. Maybe your jurors are more. Maybe they have a big range in what they score, so you want to kind of set that average to, or that cutoff score to something more in the middle. So that's the second option, is setting your minimum cutoff score to the number that feels best to you. All right, the next option you have is a little more complex, but it can be used for scenarios in which you don't really want to set the cutoff score. You want to determine the cutoff score for how many artists you've decided to move forward or not move forward. So in this case, let's just say here, if I go back, let's just remove these. So we have 25 applications in each category. We have 50 total. I did that on purpose to make this math easy. But let's say I just want to get rid of or eliminate, change not invited. I want to eliminate 10 total artists, or 20%. That's just a good number for me. I want, those remaining 80 to remain in the jury pool, so that we can continue to score them, or I just know 20% is my number. So to do that, what we'll do, you could come in here and just start playing with the numbers, trying to get this number down to 20%. Maybe, you just start messing with these numbers a little bit and trying to get it to that amount, but that will be tedious and maybe not accurate. So the way that we're going to do this is we're actually going to go back and access the scoring report. So to do that, I'm going to go to the finalize section of our jury admin page, and I'm going to go to the scoring history section. I'm going to select the round I need. So I need round 1 here, and I'm click download round 1 scores. I'm going to go ahead and open this report here. Now let me just do a few things on my end so that you can actually see this report. All right. Hopefully you should be seeing the report. If you don't, holler at me in the chat. But let's come in here. I'm going to make this a little bit easier to view. This is our scoring report. I do want to preface this by saying I'm using the Numbers app. We don't use Excel. I typically use Google Sheets. So if you wanted to import this into Google Sheets, you can just copy and paste that. If that works for you, you can use this in Numbers. You can use it in Excel, whatever software you prefer. So some of the steps I'm about to show you might change depending on what you're using, what platform you're using, but overall, the process is the same. So I'm just going to go ahead in our, freezer header rows. In Numbers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the Organize section, and I'm going to actually sort it by column D, which is our category. It says discipline, but it's actually the category. And what that's going to do is it's going to break it down into each category. We've got all of our 3D applications separate from our 2D applications. And again, in this scenario here, I really want to just eliminate 5 entries from each category so that I can eliminate 10 total. So that's why I've separated out there. The number we're going to be looking at again is the average score column. That's column F here. And you'll see that all these numbers are pretty rounded up. You'll actually want to change that so you can know exactly what number that is without it being rounded. So in Numbers, I'm going to go to Format, and then I'm going to click Cell. I'm going to then go to the number format and make sure that my decimals is either set to auto, you'll see it updated there, or about 4 decimal points I think is pretty standard, so that the number is the most unique. So now that we've got those actual average scores set, I am going to sort the average score column. So I'm going to click this. I'm going to sort it so that it is descending. So I have my higher scores first and my lowest scores at the bottom. Again, this is a very simplified spreadsheet method of sorting them and viewing it. And again, since I only have 50 entries here, this is going to look very simple. I know it might differ for your situation if you have hundreds of entries, but the process is essentially the same. And if you have any specific formulas or, spreadsheet wizard abilities, then you can go ahead and use that. This is, again, is just a very simplified version of this process. So now that I've sorted these by score, and I'm going to do this individually by certain categories. Remember how I said I wanted to eliminate 5 from each category? So I'm going to take the 5 lowest entries. You'll see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are the 5 scores, or these are the 5 entries, I should say, that I'm going to eliminate. And so what I'm doing here is I'm then going to look at the score at this cutoff point and determine what is that time? I realize here you might not be able to see this super well because I'm sharing my big screen. So let me log in a little bit here. So again, we've got our 2D category, and I just counted up 5 from the bottom. And these are the 5 that I am going to eliminate. I'm going to look at this cutoff score. So it looks like 3.33 is the highest of those being eliminated. 3.67 is the lowest of those that are going to move forward. So it's about 3.4 is the number in which any score below 3.4 is going to be not invited. If I come back to my manage section and I put in for the 2D category 3.4, you'll see, great, 5 are going to be not invited, 20 will be remaining. That's our 20%. We got it. So that's how we use that spreadsheet. Let's do it again for the 3D category. I'm going to scroll down to this 3D category. Again, I'm going to count 5 up from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are those 5 artists that are going to be eliminated. Looks like it's between 3.3 and 3. So if I just go ahead and choose a number in between 3.2, there you go. We've got our 5 not invited, our 20%. Again, and this is also assuming I want those categories to be the same for each. You might have some different numbers you want depending on how many entries in each category you're accepting. But that's the process of using this report and sorting it and figuring out based on the scores, where is that cutoff? Now, you might also encounter a situation where the cutoff is between 2 artists of the same score. You can decide what to do. Maybe you just accept all of them and allow them to move forward to be, scored in the next round. If you're at the very end of your process and you're not able to score another round, maybe you then work with the jurors to determine and have them make a selection between the tie-breaking entries. All right. So that's how you use the scoring report to determine your minimum cutoff score. Yeah. We have one other scenario I want to kind of share with you in this case. And to do this and demonstrate this, I'm going to go to round 2, but just pretend it's still round 1. And this is going to be the scenario in which the scoring rate is yes, no, maybe. So let's save that. So in this round, I had the jurors score yes, no, or maybe. And now I want to determine who will move forward. When I go to the change status to not invited section, you'll see our numbers are very low. It's, our average now is 2.28, but that's because I only had them decide between 3 different scores. Now, if you didn't already know this, I'm going to show it on the screen here again. When you are scoring yes, maybe, and no, you are actually having the jurors score in a numerical rate as well. A yes gets transferred to a score of 3, a maybe gets transferred to a score of 2, and a no becomes a 1. So when you're scoring yes, maybe, no, this is a great way to have, jurors be able to determine, yes, I want them to move forward, maybe I don't, no. When you are going to sort them in CaFÉ, they all get transferred into a numerical score. So back here, in this case, again, you could use the average if you want, especially if you have multiple jurors. This is great so that, you can cut them off by the average as well. But maybe you want it to be more like real in your head. Let's just say you only want to move people forward that received an average of a yes or a maybe, and you just want to eliminate everyone that received a no score. With one juror, this is pretty simple, but with multiple jurors, it gets averaged out. I'll go ahead and show you. But referring to our list here, if you want the yeses and the maybes to move forward, aka not get moved to not invited, and you want only entries that scored a score of no to be not invited, your minimum cutoff score is going to be 2. It's going to be maybe, because anything below this point is going to be moved to not invited. So anything below a 2 is going to move to not invited. So back in here, I'll go ahead and change this to 2. Whoops. That will update automatically, and you'll see in our list here, only entries that have scored below a 2 will be moved to not invited. With multiple jurors, this does mean that, let's say someone scored a yes, they got at least 1 yes, but 2 said no. That's not going to make the cut, and they will be eliminated. But if you only have 1 juror here, you should only see, in this case with a score of 2, cutoff as 2, you should only see a bunch of no's here. And that's just saying anyone that scored a no is going to, not move forward. If you want to make that a little bit more strict, you can move it to a 3, saying anyone that didn't score an average of yes all around, that's going to be moved to not invited. So you'll see that case here. So again, just remember how yes, no, maybes get transferred to numerical scores, and use that to determine the cutoff. All right, let's actually, well, I guess I can do it here. I'm going to show you what it's like when you move things to not invited. Let's just go ahead and take our averages here. Oops. All right, so let's pretend that I want to cut off by the average. We've got 17 to be not invited, 32 remaining. I've clicked show applications, there we go, and I've looked at my list, everything looks good. Just a note here that if you do want to manually override the decision being made, you can change their status here. Maybe they become a waitlist person. Maybe you just want to keep them in the jury pool to answer a couple questions about them, or any other reason. You can override that status by changing the drop down here, and then once you click change status, this artist, for example, won't go to not invited like the rest of them. They'll stay in the receive status, or go to some other status that you might have chosen. So just a little note there. But once everyone is selected here, you'll click change status. This is at the bottom of the list too. And it will have successfully moved your applications to the status. If I go to the events management section, you'll see we've got our 17 in the not invited section and our 33 in the received section. Don't worry, this can be reversed if you made a mistake, or if something happened and you need to do that sorting again because nothing really seemed to make sense. Anything you do in the jury process in CaFÉ can be reversed. It's not a huge deal. So you can go ahead and click on not invited, and go ahead and change them back to received if that's really what you want to do. Click change status, then you'll have all your 50 entries back in the received status, and you can do that process again to make the sort better. But in this case, I'm going to leave it as is, because the next section, the next phase of this is to take those artists that are still in the receive status and move forward with them. Now, moving forward can mean you conduct another round. So we've got, if I click the applications, we've got 33 still in our jury. Maybe I want the jurors to score again to further narrow down this number, in which case I can move it to the next round and jury round, click save. You'll see once I click that jury round and click save, the juror scores will be wiped out, not necessarily wiped out or removed. They'll just be a blank slate for that current round, and they can enter new scores. If that's the case, jurors can also, on their end, download the scoring report, just what we were looking at. That report can give them access to reference what score they gave that entry in that previous round. So that can be helpful. But let's say I didn't need a new round. I'm ready to go with these 33 entries, and I just want to invite them. These are the folks that will be invited to the event. To do that, I'm going to go to the Manage section, and I'm going to click Change Status to Invited. All right, first things first, gotta select my categories, do them all at once. And you'll see it looks a little different here. We've got the same table, but instead of a minimum cutoff score, we have a maximum cutoff score. And instead of to be invited or to be not invited, we have to be invited. Now you'll see here that the maximum cutoff score is not defaulted to the average, it's defaulted to 0. And that's because in CaFÉ, the common workflow is to eliminate or move artists to not invited first, and then take whoever's left and move them all to invited. The way the maximum cutoff score works, and I'm going to display this as well, the maximum cutoff score will take any entries above that score and move them to invited. So it's the reverse of the minimum. Instead of minimum being any entries scored below, maximum is any entry scored above the cutoff score. And in this case, they'll be moved to invited as opposed to not invited. So with our maximum cutoff score is 0, any entry scored above 0 will be moved to invited. And that's why it's set to the default, so that it's anyone that's left. They just had to have scored above 0, meaning they just had to have a score. They'll be moved to invited. So I can click Show Applications. This will mean our 32 applications will be moved to invited. That's all great. You can still override any status if you want to, move them to a waitlist or something different. You can do that. And then once you're done, you'll click Change Status. Those 32 have been moved. Let's go back here. 32 invited. Now you might be noticing here, we have one application still in the receive status, and that's a little odd. So let's figure out why that may be. Let's go to the jury administration page. Let's view our applications, because this is going to show any applications in the receive status. And you'll see, yeah, we still have one application. Now you might also be noticing that there's no score given by the juror or jurors. And this is why they did not move to invited. So while the invited step does move, quote unquote, everybody, it's only moving anybody that scored above a 0 or that got a score in general. Because this juror or these jurors did not score this entry, they remained in the receive status. So this is why it's super important that the jurors score all the entries so that they're being taken into account when we're doing these steps. And let's say in this case, we really only have this one application, but either through conversations with your jurors that they're actually going to be invited, and they should be in this section here. You can go ahead, instead of having the jurors go back and add the score and be able to sort them based on the maximum cutoff score, you can just override that by changing the status here, and you can change it to invited. Once I do that, you'll see our table goes away because no applications are in received anymore, and you'll see now we've got that 33 still there. So that's how you can fix that situation. You can always move the artists manually. You don't necessarily have to use that sorting process with the maximum cutoff score if it's just a few. That is the process for finalizing those selections. Once you're done with the jury, you should have 0 in received. Maybe there's some applications in different statuses, such as withdrawn or other, but as long as the artists that are not invited are in not invited, and the artists that are in invited are, truly invited to the event, you're ready to finalize. The first step that I think is best for this, before you go ahead and close out the jury itself, is to notify the artist. So you'd go to events and communication. I'm not going to talk in depth about this process because I want to leave time for questions, but essentially what you would do is you'd send your one email to the batch of not invited artists. You'll click that status, draft your email. You'll fill in that one generic message that will then go to all of the artists and tell them that they've, not been invited, or that certain artworks, in this case, because we were scoring multiple artworks from each artist, certain artworks are not invited. And then once you're done with that, you would send an email to your invited and send that email. Again, we have instructions for this process in our Help Center. We also have a couple webinars about this topic on our YouTube channel. Once you've notified the artist, the last step is to complete your jury, and you'll do that by setting your jury status to complete. Click Save, and what that does is that it opens the curtains so that artists on their profile in CaFÉ can then view the application status, whether it's invited or not invited, and view the status of each artwork there. It gives them a better view as well, a complete view of all of their entries. So make sure that jury status is set to complete. The last thing that you might want to do is re-download that scoring history report. That could just be good for record keeping on your end if you want to save that, or if you want quick access to be able to view any jurors' scores or comments. If an artist were to reach out and ask for feedback, if that's something you're able to provide, you can use the scoring history report as a quick way to find that information. All right, so Susan, you asked, we have a situation where we have juror number 1, jury in all pieces for the show. Then we have jury number 2, he needs to look at the pieces that juror juried in from juror 1 and choose about 10 pieces from that. How do we accomplish that? I would just separate that in between 2 different rounds, and then you just have a different juror in each round. I think I'm interpreting your situation correctly. So let's say you have round 1 and juror number 1 goes in and juries the pieces for the show. You then go through the sorting process to change those that did not make it into not invited. But though instead of changing those to invited, the ones that are going to be in the show, you're going to leave them in received. When you leave them in received, that then allows you to set up a round number 2. And that just essentially separates those 2, sections so that juror number 1 scores aren't getting, interpreted into or averaged into juror number 2 scores. So you change it to round 2, then you have your second juror go in and score those pieces that are going to be in the show and choose those 10, award winners or whatever that might be. Once you've done that and that juror number 2 is done, you can then go ahead and move everyone from the receive status into the invited status so that they're in that right place. And then Sharon, you said our first round will be online and second round will be in person. Can jury access CaFÉ during easily on their mobile devices? We do not recommend CaFÉ scoring in the jury module on mobile. It's really optimized for a desktop view. Some jurors have luck with the tablet version if they're using a tablet, but it's really that kind of larger screen that's really best for scoring on CaFÉ. If you're having them score in person and you want to have them do that manually, maybe on paper, maybe you download the report from CaFÉ and you have them score that way. One report that could be useful is the PDF of the media inventory list. So if I were to just choose that from the invited folks and click media inventory list, I'll show you once this downloads. It can kind of be your own scoring card, essentially. It kind of has a thumbnail reference of that image, and they can put in a numerical score. They can write it down, in which case later you would then input that into CaFÉ. That could work too. But generally, I do only recommend the desktop version for CaFÉ jury. All right, next question. David, while the works are in received or reviewed categories before the jurying is in progress, are artists able to withdraw a work and submit another? So the short answer is no. Artists cannot withdraw a piece of artwork. And they can't replace or substitute artwork unless you allow it. Now, if it's still before your application deadline and an artist reaches out to you and wants to replace a piece of work with something else, you would then take their application that they did submit and change it to the incomplete status. That allows the artist to make edits to their current application and they can swap their artwork one for one. If it's after the deadline, you'd have to do that by, instead of using the incomplete status, you use the exception status because you're making an exception after the deadline. They can again swap their images one for one. If you are using a scoring by application call, in which case images are grouped together into one body of work that you're scoring as a whole, artists can make those edits whether in incomplete or exception, and they can add or remove images within that portfolio. But again, only you are able to give them that access. but they aren't able to withdraw. They can withdraw their piece too if they email you and say they don't want to be considered anymore, in which case you can just put them in the withdrawn status. But yeah. Then I have another question. Do I have any suggestions for managing a jury process that includes preliminary jury work virtually and independently, and then a shared meeting where discussion and final decisions take place? Yeah, one suggestion is to, conduct your round one, just like you're saying, independently and virtually, where the jurors will log in and score. Again, you might, let's say we're in round one for that. You can set up a scorecard style, maybe grid view, list view, whatever works for them. And they'll do that, independently. And then maybe you go ahead and sort them or narrow down the selections, but then you want to meet in person. What I would recommend is in your setup in person, you would have one person kind of be the quote unquote juror of the scorecard. And while you all might be making decisions and out loud or in person, oh, they're done virtually. Okay, so let's just say, sorry, I'm rereading your comment. So you do round one independently virtually. That's great. And then in round two, you are meeting over Zoom or something, and you want, again, I would still recommend having one person input the group score, the consensus score. So you'd create whoever, maybe you would log in as a juror and you would put that score. You would share your screen of the juror scorecard so that you're looking at the same piece at the same time. You would put in that group consensus score. And in that case, maybe that's a round two situation so that you can separate out from the round one scores. You would go to round two, meet virtually together, input that group consensus score. And maybe in that scenario too, if it's where you're inputting preliminary scores, but you're really making final decisions together and you want to reference the current scores, you could log in here as an administrator and share your screen and kind of show this table here. Oops, they're not going to be in there. You'd show the table that appeared earlier with the scores in there. And then you can just change, if the consensus is yes, they're going to move forward, you can just change that status to invited manually. You don't even have to put in a score. So that's the process for jurying on CaFÉ. I hope you learned something useful or got a good review of the process. If you have more in-depth questions, you can email us at this email here, cafehelp@wearecreativewest.org, and we can help you out there. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to join our next webinar.